All right, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We got a great turnout here today. I think we're 60 people in here. That is awesome. Thank you so much. Today's webinar, we're kicking off actually a 4-week webinar on building a next-gen marketing agency. When I was doing some research on this title, so the first question is why is this important? So I'll share a little bit of my experience, what I've seen in the industry recently, and then I won't take too much of your time. We'll jump straight in. I've noticed everyone's been noticing there's a lot of like scary changes in our industry recently. I know the tariffs were something that is getting a lot of our clients, and I'm sure a lot of your clients, very scared. Together with in general economic insecurity that's being felt across our industry. We're finding that clients are cutting back on business. They're definitely being a lot more cautious when requesting new services. For us, and probably for many of you, our old way of gaining new business and retaining our clients at times, it's just not enough. We need to up our game. We got to stay relevant. And for today, kicking off this 4-week session, I wanted to start with 2 really important topics. The first topic we're going to kick off with Pranav is offering your clients more. I actually just had a great webinar with Vince Dong and Mike Hart recently. I would say what stood out to me the most from that webinar was Mike Hart mentioned something that you got to give some time to listen to your clients. Spend some time with them. Go in without an agenda. Listen to what they have to say. And maybe today we could up that a step and see how we could serve them better. It's not just about what they're paying us, but how can we bring more benefit to our clients? We want to keep them and we want them to know that we're taking care of them the best that we can. So we're going to have Pranav today discuss that. And then we're going to jump into our second session with improving our own operations and balancing creatives and their quirks. Not really their quirks, but balancing creatives and their creative excellence. It's just a quick couple of points and we'll jump straight in. So questions, if anyone has any questions, drop it in the chat. We left the chat open today, so anyone could either leave it in the Q&A section or leave it in the chat. If you want to introduce yourself, feel free to do that. I'm sure we're going to hear about recordings a little bit later on. So yes, we will be sending a recording of the session out afterwards. And then quickly the agenda. So today we have a double session lined up. First session is with Pranav. Pranav is going to focus on marketing metrics. I would say not your typical focus on marketing metrics about how to improve your own incoming leads with these metrics. Rather, we're going to focus today on how you can serve your clients better with these metrics and help them with their marketing needs. Between the 2 sessions, we're going to have like a 15-minute break. If you guys need to jump off to grab a coffee or anything else, jump off. If you want to hang out in the room with me, we'll do some networking. You're definitely welcome to hang out with me. And at the top of the hour, we're gonna start our second session with Kimberly. So who is Pranav? So Pranav is the co-founder and the CEO of Paramark. Pranav's got 15 years experience of growth and marketing with some really big name enterprise companies. We asked him to join us today, and thank you for joining us to share some of this experience with us, especially about supporting our end clients and their measurement goals. Pranav, the floor is all yours.
Amazing. So first off, I'm Ruben. No, I'm kidding. I'm Pranav. But you'll see the Zoom thing say Ruben. We're not sure why it says that, but just I'm Pranav, Pranav. I will repeat that a couple of times, but really nice to be here with you all. Ruben, thanks for inviting me. I'm going to walk you through a presentation that I have given maybe, I don't know, 20 times till now over the course of the last couple of years. And, I want you all to ask lots of questions. Spicy questions are extra welcome. The topic of measurement and attribution and all of that stuff is usually quite spicy, and I love the hot takes. So please ask ahead. I'm going to share my screen and then kind of go into this presentation. So give me a sec. This presentation is culminated based on all of my experience from the last 15 years or so. So what is that experience? So I spent time at companies like PayPal, at Dropbox. I was at as a private equity backed company called Magento, which became Adobe Commerce. I ran growth at a fintech called Pilot, and then I led a marketing team at a startup that got bought by Bill.com. So I've seen private companies, public companies, private equity companies, and now I run a startup to support marketers and marketing agencies, and we'll talk about all of that. The one consistent theme that was very evident over the course of my career was that measurement is hard. And everyone was doing something a little bit sort of hacky. We all know that it's not perfect, it's not precise, and so we do our best to kind of come up with the numbers that your clients will sort of feel comfortable with, feel confident with. But there's always an undercurrent of, can I trust these numbers? Can I trust this measurement? Both, not because of some malintent, just because it is hard. And so it's really important, I think, if you are an agency owner, and I suspect that most of you are agency owners or agency professionals in the audience, to have a principled way to think about measurement. And hopefully I'll leave you with some thoughts today that will help you with your end clients, with your own business, and so on and so forth. So the first sort of big thing that I talk about a lot with our customers' agencies, is that you really have to think about this whole sort of domain as an investor first and a marketer second. What I mean by this is, if you take a dispassionate view of the business, right? And what that means is, I'm going to invest a dollar. What do I get on the other side of the equation? And holistically, without sort of thinking about attribution and last click and all that fun stuff, you start thinking like an investor. Start talking like an investor with your end clients. It changes the game completely. And so that's the first sort of mindset shift. Think like an investor first, marketer second. And that will generate a longer term sort of trust rather than the short term metrics that we all get indexed on fairly quickly, right? It's the same concept if you've been following the stock market for the last 90 days, right? Lots of ups, lots of downs, lots of ups back again. And if at any point you were just thinking about sort of the short term of how to win the day trade, it's quite challenging. But you zoom out right now and you look at the stock market for the 90 days, nothing's really changed. Like, do that exercise, right? Like the last 90 days, I think you're back to like zero or something. So investor first, and think about the aggregate metrics, think about sort of the overall business before you think about sort of marketing metrics. Okay. There's a whole bunch of noise in the market around this whole idea of attributed conversions, influenced conversions, sourced conversions, marketing sourced, sales sourced, if you're in the B2B world, and this whole sort of notion of justification. I have to justify my existence. I have to prove my value. It's all very defensive, right? It's like we have been put in a corner, we are defending ourselves, as opposed to going on the offense and talking about, hey, let's figure out how we can get incremental business to you that you did not have before. Who cares whether they click on an ad or click on an email or not? What matters is, are they net new to the business or not? And I like this, Mario analogy here of, you're going from the little Mario to the big Mario, right? And hopefully you're finding enough magic mushrooms in the game to grow the business overall. And that's effectively the job of any agency or even an in-house marketer, right? You're trying to grow the business. So keep the focus there, because if the business is not growing in an aggregate fashion, who cares how much credit we got? We're all going to be out of a job if it stays flat, right? So long-term thinking. Okay, what is incrementality? That word is a thing that I want you to, go put it in Chat GPT or Claude or Perplexity or whatever it is. It's a fascinating rabbit hole, and it's very different from attribution. And so the core concept is that if a prospect would have bought from you, regardless of what marketing that they saw, that marketing isn't very incremental. Doesn't matter if they clicked on it, viewed it for 60 minutes, they would have just come to you anyway. Vice versa. If a prospect would have never come to you until and unless they saw a piece of marketing, then that marketing is very incremental. That's what we care about. We don't care about sort of how many clicks and views and what it generates. Those are leading indicators. We get it. But ultimately, was there a cause and effect relationship between whatever marketing or sales or affiliate that you're doing and your business metrics? So that's the core concept of incrementality. Now, I've spoken to thousands of marketers and both in-house and agency over the last few years. And I will say that we all get trapped in more detail, more granularity, slicing and dicing the data 100 different ways. But there are actually only about 5 or 6 questions that you need to answer. If you could answer these 6 questions for your CMO, for your CFO, for your client, for your board, you don't need any of the other detail. They will let you be. They will let you execute and work on your craft. So figure out a way to answer these questions at the highest level. And if you can, and if your, overall marketing contribution and your return on investment is looking good, they will give you the freedom to experiment within your budget and how you sort of reallocate between one channel to another channel or one strategy to another strategy. So think about that. And I don't know, Ruben, if you agree or disagree, but like these 5 or 6 questions come up with every single customer for us, right? This is like the I've never heard anybody go like, oh yeah, no, those are not the questions. I have like these other 6 questions that I'm trying to answer.
Yes, definitely. As a marketer myself, this is always what we're focusing on.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Now, why do I say click attribution is dead? It's a little bit of a strong statement. Maybe it's not really dead, but like I do think that it focuses or it's unable to answer these questions in most cases. And that's why I think it's dead. It's dead from the perspective of trying to answer these questions. Now, why is it structurally sort of bad? First, by definition, clicks are not going to give credit to any channel that is not click-based. Videos. Do you sit there sitting in front of your Hulu and click on videos? You don't. Do you click on YouTube ads? Very few. But do they influence you? Yes, they do. Just like TV, just like radio, just like listening to podcasts. So by definition, you are causing yourself harm by only evaluating the ROI of your marketing efforts if you're only looking at clicks. So that's the first thing. The second is, again, by definition, anything that's offline, billboards, direct mail, um, radio, events, all of those things are not going to get measured. The third is even when you do have digital channels where you have clicks that are able to measure things, all the privacy changes make it extremely hard. Safari blocks all third-party cookies, so does Mozilla. Yes, Chrome doesn't, and they've reversed their positioning on that. But the reality is, think about how many people are on Safari on iOS, right? Another fun fact, if you send email and you open it in Apple Mail, all your UTM codes get stripped out. So good luck trying to use UTM codes and click IDs on some of these systems. So even on digital platforms, you get a narrow view if you're only looking at click tracking and click attribution. And then finally, there's this famous saying, I don't know if anybody is a West Wing fan. That's a show from the 90s. So if you haven't watched it, watch it. It's amazing. It's about this fake president. And the second episode of that show had the title of post hog, ergo propter hog. And what that means, that's Latin for saying just because one thing happened after the other thing does not make it causal, does not mean that the first thing caused the second thing. So this happens a lot in click attribution. Somebody clicked on an ad and then they converted, so the click must have caused the conversion. That is not how causation works, right? It's like saying I woke up in the morning and then I worked out. Therefore, me waking up caused me to work out, right? Like that's just the sequence of things that happen. There's no cause and effect relationship. I'll give you a great example here. You're gonna spend time on this webinar. I'm not even showing you a click, right? But you're gonna go, search for Paramark. Maybe some of you are already doing that, and you're gonna click on the first link that shows up in Google. If we were doing branded search ads, you're likely to click on the first branded search ad and go to Paramark.com. That branded search ad had no effect on your decision to search for Paramark or to go to Paramark.com. But in a click attribution model, that's what's going to show up as, hey, it looks great. So think about that structurally when you are designing your measurement, when you're designing sort of how your campaign should work. Okay, so okay, I talked about the problem. What do you do? This is complicated. Okay, so how do we solve this problem? First thing, none of this is rocket science. None of this is some newfangled technology. It's actually existed for a long time. So I'm showing you examples from CPG, from B2B, from e-com, from marketplaces, from new businesses, from old businesses. They're all using machine learning, incrementality testing, marketing mix modeling. These are all sort of concepts. So go on that journey with all your AI tools and start to learn what these tools are, what they mean, because I can guarantee to you that if you figure out how to become an expert on those, your clients are going to love you. And in the past, it was inaccessible. You had to have PhDs and data scientists on staff, but now there's a lot of tools out there that will do this type of work at a much more affordable price point, and you can get up and running fairly quick. So tons to research and get smart on. Okay. The first thing that you have to do is get really good about picking a metric for your business. Okay, what do I mean by this? If you ask a marketing leader today, what is success for you? Many of them, out of peer pressure or from the pressure of their CFO and your CEO, are going to say, well, obviously revenue. And then you sort of dig into that conversation and you peel the onion a little bit and you realize that it's a 12-month sales cycle. And there's all these things that happen after pipeline is created that has nothing to do with marketing. There's a solutions team, there's a sales team, the pricing is all custom, and marketing doesn't control any of that. Marketing doesn't influence any of that. And yet, marketers are being forced to hold themselves accountable to revenue. So that's the first mistake, is figuring out the right metric to hold marketing accountable to. For B2B business, that might be pipeline creation. It might be leads. For B2C businesses, that might be straight all the way to a sign up, a trial, an order, whatever that might be. So you have to think about what is the right metric that is a good measure of success. And I think revenue is a lazy answer. You want something that is going to respond to marketing fairly quickly. You don't have 12 months to wait if your sales cycle is actually 12 months. So that's an important point. And if you pick the wrong metric, everything else kind of breaks down after that. Okay, so the second piece that we then talk about is measuring what matters. And what I mean by this is, depending on your marketing mix, not just sort of paid media, but everything else that happens in your marketing team, you have to collect the right data. And doing everything in isolation, and this can sometimes happen with agencies, not because you don't want to be holistic, but because you're part of the mix, the customer's business is isolated to, we do paid social, or we do lifecycle, or we do just paid search. But if you look at it in isolation, it becomes really hard. So you have to convince or ask your customers to think about all the things that are happening in your marketing mix. And the metrics that we typically recommend that you collect and you measure are whatever your success metric is, right? So if that's signups, if that's leads, if that's pipeline, over time, you have a clear definition of that metric and you're tracking it over time. And then for each of your marketing channels, what is the actual customer engagement within that channel? And so that might be for Facebook and Google, it might be things like impressions or video views if you have YouTube or things of that nature. And you're basically tracking how many video views am I getting day over that entire time period. For events, it might be very different. It might be event registrations or event attendance. For email, it might be email sends, not opens or clicks, like because opens has their own issue, right? Open rates are not accurate, so on and so forth. But email sends is pretty clear of like how many people are you actually reaching through your channel. So that's the step one, is all of your marketing channels and your key sort of measure of success. That's what you collect. There's a industry jargon term for what we're doing here that's called marketing mix modeling. There's a lot more nuance here. You can go read about it at your own time. But if you don't collect the data, you can't do much more after that. So what do you do after that? When you've collected that data, you apply statistics and machine learning to that data to figure out which of those channels and strategies are actually related to your success metric. Versus, yes, you're doing a bunch of stuff, but there's no effect when you increase investment in this example, in Google, it doesn't have any correlation with an increase in signups. When you pull back spending in Google, has no effect on signups. Signups just does whatever it does, and however much irregularity that you're introducing in Google search, it's not having an effect on signups. I have nothing against Google search. I'm just picking on that as a channel, but unless you've done that analysis, it's really hard to know if there's a true causal relationship between those two things. So you have tools, you have open source packages, you have analysts who can do this type of work and help you understand how much of your overall sign-up number is incremental versus baseline. Aggregate. Once you have an aggregate view, you can now break it down into individual channels and strategies. And again, as you're using the same sort of set of tools and technologies to achieve that. You can see that over time, and you can explain this to your customers. Now, what is incremental? What is baseline? In very lay person terms, incremental means all the stuff that can be explained by all of your marketing and sales investments. And baseline means your organic demand, your word of mouth, your built up brand equity, things that you might have done 5 years ago, 3 years ago, right? Those are not going to show up in your models. And so you want your baseline going up and you want your incremental going up over time. That baseline
Now,
is
can I
your
ask you a quick question?
correct.
If in person, like marketing meets, would you classify that as incremental or baseline?
Say that again. So in-person marketing meets like events.
Like industry group, yeah.
Well, if you track them appropriately, right? So how do we track them? We track when the event happened, how many people were we exposed to at that event. And what that, usually means is some type of event registration. It kind of depends on the event itself, right? Like if it's a booth at a large trade show, very difficult to get a sense of like what was our exposure, right? So you have to use proxy metrics, but you create a record of that over time. And what you would see in your model is if events are, useful and successful, and if you're doing them at scale, they'll show up in the incremental. Now, events are unique because I'll also give you a counter example of that. We did a dinner with a bunch of CMOs just like 2 nights ago. I don't need fancy measurement for that. I know which of those CMOs turned from a dinner conversation to a demo, right? So sometimes
Gotcha.
it's actually quite simple as long as you do the right tracking, which is these are the people who came to the dinner. It should be in your CRM. And here are the people who then did a demo. It should be in the CRM. There's like no reason for fancy measurement. But when you're doing massive events, right? I'm doing, I don't know, I'm just making this up. I'm going to the Salesforce event and the HubSpot event, and I'm at like every sales and marketing trade show, then it's a different equation. And you do need to figure out, okay, which types of events should I invest more in and less in? And you need more structured data to help you make that type of analysis.
Got you. Thank you.
Cool. I'm gonna the second piece, which I think most folks are not doing enough of, is experimentation. So everything that we talked about up until now is based on understanding sort of trends and correlations between your marketing investments and your business metrics. That's helpful, but it's only helpful for channels where you have historical data. If you've never done YouTube in your life, this model is not going to tell you anything about YouTube. It has no information about YouTube. So what do you do in that case? This is where experimentation is super helpful. Now, most people think about experimentation as, and all of us have probably said something to the effect of, let's test it. We'll see which version does better. And the reality is most people do testing wrong. And to do a test, to do an experiment, you have to have the first rule of experimentation is you have to have a control. So when you're testing a new channel, you're testing a new strategy, what is your control? Is there a group of people that are not going to be exposed to that YouTube advertising that you're going to do? And if you don't have a control, you did not run a test. Let that sink in. If you don't have a control, you have not run a test. So testing one version versus the other version is not that helpful. Testing the incrementality, you're trying to say there's 100 people who were not exposed to YouTube and there's 100 people who were exposed to YouTube. And then I want to see the conversion rate between those two groups. So how do you do this? If you're starting out small, you can literally take any channel and only target it to a couple of geographies. Only run it in Texas. Don't run it nationally right off the bat. See if you can lift your metric in Texas as a result of that, because now you have the Texas trend and you have the rest of the country trend. You started doing advertising in Texas, does that go up? And everything else stays flat, right? If it doesn't go, if it continues to stay flat, your YouTube didn't work. Go back to the drawing board and do it again. See when you can inflect Texas, because when you can inflect Texas, now you can have causal proof that you can take back to your customer, to your board, to your CFO, like, hey, we ran an experiment. Here's the control. Here's the test. Here's the result. Here's the budget. Here's the cost per incremental. Let's go scale it nationally. You can test an entire channel. You can test different levels of budget. You can test new creative, obviously. You can test targeting mechanisms. Do you go with, optimizing for bottom of the funnel conversion events versus, reach and awareness and frequency type of metrics? All of these permutation combinations can be tested when you have, tons of scale and data. When you're data poor, and if your customers are relatively small, you can still do this in a, you're not going to use perfect science, but the concept still applies, right? So how would Paramark do it? We're a small company. We're, 10-person company. We're, millions of dollars in revenue, but our target market is, massive. So when we start advertising, we're not going to go national. We're going to pick one or two cities and just advertise in those cities and see if we can get more traffic and more leads and more demos in those cities. That's going to be our way of comparing our test and control, even with a very small budget. Okay, just being sensitive to time, I think we got another 15 minutes if I'm not wrong, or maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, something like 15, 20 minutes.
Great. One other thing that I would say is both Meta and LinkedIn have a native conversion lift product. So if you haven't looked at conversion lift, I hope that many of you have, but if you haven't, just type conversion lift into Google or into ChatGPT for Meta. It's self-serve. You can log into your ads manager, you can do conversion lift yourself, and it's basically doing this, but doing it in a self-serve fashion. LinkedIn is in beta right now. They haven't gone GA, but I think they're expecting to go GA sometime in June or July. So I would follow LinkedIn's news or follow me on LinkedIn. I talk about this stuff all the time. Every other platform, Google doesn't have a native thing. You have to call their reps to set up a conversion lift, so on and so forth. But then again, if you have an analytics team in your agency, or if you have an analyst, or if you have an analyst at your client, you should be looking at, experimentation and marketing mix modeling, the stuff that we talked. Yeah.
Sure. Can I ask you a quick question on experimentation?
Yeah, go for it.
So how much of your your budget or your client's marketing budget would you allocate towards experimentation?
Yeah, great question. Very, very rough rule of thumb is 10%. And
Got you.
yeah, now there's math on this. There's actually a post that I wrote about how to calculate how much budget you need to be able to, do this. So the rough answer is 10%. There's a much more detailed answer that you can run for your own business, for your own, customer set. So happy to share a link to that post if that's helpful later, Ruben. Um, but yeah, like, if 10% should be enough, because not every test is about increasing your budget. Sometimes tests are also about decreasing your budget. So you can kind of, trade from one to the other as you're kind of doing your experimentation. But if you're in a hyper growth trajectory, then you do want additional capital, because that's like, nobody wants to cut spend if you're growing that fast. And you want to have additional spend, but spend that, money wisely through a controlled fashion.
For sure. Thank you.
The last thing that I will leave you with is, once you've done all of this, right? You've got a model running, you've run experiments. That's when you can start to get really smart about your forecasting and say, if we were to spend money in this fashion for the next 3 months, this is what our forecast could be. And this is ultimately what CFOs want and what CMOs want. But if you haven't done the legwork, all your forecasts are basically nonsense. So you got to have that, forecasting sort of methodology, and maybe you have your own ways of doing it, but being very realistic and grounded in what the drivers are of those models, like we talked about, all the marketing channels, your key KPIs, what the conversion rate from there is. You've run some experiments, you have some proof that feeds into your forecasting process. Um, so, quick summary: have a realistic model for your business. What is the actual measure of success? Then measure it and all the drivers for, what um, is potentially a driver for your measure of success. Estimate incrementality with all the correlational work that we talked about and marketing mix modeling and so on and so forth. Then find causality with experimentation. That's the gold standard. You do all of these things and you start to have a best worst case, forecast that you start to co-own with your customers, and hopefully beat forecasts through, big swings and big experiments that you're running. I don't think I had anything else, but let's open up for questions, see if people have anything they want to talk about.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. That was awesome. Yeah. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll definitely try to get to them. So I'll jump in with something that I've been kind of curious with, I would say the new like angle that we're taking on today in terms of like helping clients, but maybe with a specific focus on clients that are considering reducing their budgets. So they're working on a little bit of a tight budget. It's thin, they're putting pressure on. Which metrics would you think would be most important for them to follow, or for them to really hone in on and focus on?
I mean, honestly, my recommendation, so here's how I think about it. If you have sophisticated tools like the ones we talked about today, then you're essentially looking at your cost per incremental lead, or cost per incremental account, or cost per incremental order, whatever your measure of success is. And you're essentially taking the most expensive ones and cutting there. As a general rule of thumb, I can say with pretty high confidence that you'd want to pull back on things that are direct response. And what I mean by that is, branded search is a great one to test right off the bat. It is highly unlikely that branded search is incremental for most businesses. So I'd start there. I would think about doing a good amount of research on where your audience hangs out online, and
Okay.
using that to dictate where you show up and where you invest, right? So what I mean by this is, like, I don't know how many of you have done this, right? So what I do with our customers is I'll ask them, hey, can you show me your home screen on your phone? And why am I doing that? I'm trying to see what apps are they using, not just what they will say out loud, right? Because everyone will say I don't use TikTok, but like we all know that you use TikTok. I'm just making that up. Um, but like, what apps are they using when they open the app? What are the channels that they're subscribing to? What is the music they're listening to? What are the news shows they're listening to? What are the podcasts that, like, once you develop an understanding of your audience in that way, this is like basic sort of, media consumption research, then when you make your budget decisions about where to invest, it should be a one-to-one map. And you're not just making decisions off of click attribution, you're making decisions off of sort of first party information that you're gathering from your audience. That's what I would say. And I definitely think branded search is very inflated. For every customer that we run it, it almost always comes back as not incremental at all.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you for that. A question from Joshua. He wanted to know what analytical and dashboard platforms you recommend.
Yes, I mean, I'm obviously biased because we work at Paramark, right? So our um, there's many tools out there. One of them is, obviously sort of Paramark, but there are, sorry, let me stop sharing and just kind of distracted by my notifications. Um, so go check out paramark.com, but then there are many other tools, right? So if you're in the B2C space, there are tools like House, Measured, Recast, Prescient. These are all of our competitors. There's a new one called Workamajig. I think that's what it's called. There are tools for post-purchase surveys for attribution. So Fairing is one of them. No Commerce is another one of them. If you just type, hey, what are great incrementality testing solutions on ChatGPT, or what are great, marketing mix modeling or post-purchase attribution surveys, you'll see them all there. B2B is a little bit more complicated. I don't think there are good solutions for B2B, I'll be honest. There are solutions out there like Dream Data and Hockey Stack and Caliber Mind, Infinigrow. Again, these are all competitors to ours, but I think they're all using click attribution. And so I don't personally recommend them, but they're out there. You could go explore them. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Got you. Thank you. Awesome. Any other last minute questions from the crowd? If not, we will close out and let you go.
Cool. If people are being shy about questions, feel free to shoot me a note on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active out there, happy to interact with you all and just do the best I can to answer any specific questions you might have. And thanks for inviting me, Ruben. This was fun. I like talking about this topic, and if you all have more questions, let me know.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I learned a lot today. It was great to have you on. Thank you for your time.
Amazing. All right. Have a good one, y'all.
Perfect. Awesome.